A ridge above the Rocky Mountains at 4 in the afternoon. Snow, wind, a road that climbs 9 miles and ends at an iron gate. Move closer, past the gate, up the drive, toward a house that should not exist in a valley this small. 4 stories, green slate roof, an octagonal turret rising 82 feet into a sky the color of pewter, and at the very top, in a copper cupola, a bell that has not rung in 40 years. Closer still, through the tall front window, into a room full of pillar candles somebody has lit for somebody who is not here yet. And now, on the second floor, in a locked study nobody has entered in 11 months, bundles of letters, tied in blue ribbon, hundreds of them, every envelope addressed in the same handwriting, to my daughter, down in the valley, 9 miles below. A bus door opens. A girl steps out into the snow. There is a house on a mountain in Colorado with 41 rooms, a bronze bell in a copper cupola, and a telescope hidden in a turret that has been pointing for 22 years at a single winding road. Nobody in the valley knew who the house was waiting for, until the winter a girl in an olive green backpack climbed off a bus in Elderwin Hollow and started walking up the mountain in the dark. The last night Ophira Whitaker spent on the streets of Denver, the temperature dropped to 17 degrees. Not that she was counting. She had stopped counting 3 winters ago. She was 22 years old. She weighed 106 pounds. She carried everything she owned in a canvas backpack, the color of old olives, and inside that backpack, wrapped in a torn pillowcase, was a Bible, small, leather, the cover cracked from years of being opened and closed by hands that did not belong to her anymore, her mother's hands. Rosalind Whitaker had died when Ophira was 3, and that Bible was the only proof left that a woman with that name had ever loved a girl with this face. She walked with her head down because that was the trick, because if you kept your head down, people looked past you, which was safer than being looked at, especially in December, especially at night, especially when you were 22 and pretty in that quiet ruin way that made men stop their cars. She reached the shelter downtown at 9:47. The volunteer at the door was a heavy-set woman named Ida. Ida did not smile at her. Ida did not need to. Ida had known Ophira for 4 winters, and there was a kind of tenderness in the way she nodded, then handed over a thin gray blanket and a paper cup of soup, so hot it burned right through the wax. "Cots open by the window tonight, sweetheart." "Thank you, Ida." "Cold one coming?" "I know. Something waiting for you at the desk." Ophira looked up. Ida jerked her chin toward the little office in the back. "Fella came by around 6, said it was important, left an envelope. For me, for an Ophira Whitaker. You know another one, she didn't." She walked back to the office with the soup steaming in her hand and her heartbeat suddenly loud in her ears, because nobody ever left anything for her, because nobody knew where she was, and nobody had known where she was for 4 years, and even before that, nobody had really known, not the way that word was supposed to mean. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, the kind of paper you save for weddings and wills. Her name was written on the front in ink the color of dried blood. The seal on the back was dark red, wax, pressed with something that looked like an old-fashioned letter H. She sat down on a folding chair. She turned the envelope over twice, and then she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, a phone number, an address in downtown Denver, and 2 lines of typewritten instruction. "Miss Whitaker, Please present yourself at the offices of Thackeray and Bell on Wednesday morning regarding a matter of inheritance. This appointment cannot be forwarded. It cannot be rescheduled. It can only be kept. She read it 3 times, because inheritance was a word that belonged to other people, because she had nothing to inherit and nobody to inherit from, because the only family she had ever been told about was a father who had walked away, and mothers did not leave inheritances when they died at 26 with a Bible and a hairbrush and nothing else to their name. She almost threw it out. She almost balled it up and dropped it in the wire trash can beside the desk, but her hand stopped because something in her chest, something old and starved and stubborn, said, "What if? What if?" She folded the letter into quarters, slipped it inside her mother's Bible, ate her soup in 3 long swallows, and she went to bed with her boots still on, because you always slept with your boots on when you were young and alone in a room full of strangers. She did not sleep. Not really. She stared at the ceiling, and she thought about her father. She had never seen a picture of him. She did not know his name. She did not know if he was tall or short or kind or cruel, and every time she had asked the foster homes, the caseworkers, the shelter aunts who sometimes braided her hair, they all said the same thing. "Sweetheart," he walked away. That was the sentence. 4 words. It had been the wallpaper of her whole life. She had learned to say it before she learned to say the alphabet. And now some lawyer wanted to talk to her about an inheritance. She rolled onto her side. She pressed her forehead against her backpack. She whispered into the dark, not quite a prayer, not quite, not one. "Please, just this once, let it not be nothing." Wednesday morning, the sky over Denver was the color of skim milk. The offices of Thackeray and Bell were on the 14th floor of a granite building on 17th Street, the kind of building that had brass revolving doors and a doorman who did not blink at her canvas backpack because he was too well trained to blink at anything. She rode the elevator up alone. Her reflection in the polished steel looked like a stranger, dark blonde hair pulled back in a knot, freckles across her nose, green eyes too big for her face, a parka 2 sizes too large that had belonged in a previous life to a man she had briefly and unwisely loved. The elevator dinged. She stepped out. The receptionist looked her up, looked her down, looked her up again. "Miss Whitaker." "Yes." "Mr. Thackeray is waiting." The office at the end of the hall smelled like leather and pipe tobacco and the ghost of a fire that had gone out an hour ago. The man behind the desk was old, a face carved deep with lines, eyes that had watched more decades pass than most men saw. He stood up when she came in. He shook her hand, and when he looked at her, his eyes did something strange. They filled, just for a second, just enough that she noticed. Then he cleared his throat and gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Whitaker, my name is Barnaby Thackeray. I have been waiting to meet you for a very long time." "You don't know me?" "No." "Then how have you been waiting?" He smiled, a small, tired, unbearably gentle smile. "That, my dear, is a very long story, and it is not mine to tell." He unlocked a drawer. He set a wooden box on the desk between them. The box was old. Cedar, she thought. She could smell it. The wood had gone the color of dark honey with age, and the brass hinges had been polished so many times that the metal underneath had worn thin. He opened the lid. Inside were 3 things: a brass key on a length of blue ribbon, an antique pocket watch, silver, the case engraved with something too small for her to read, and a folded deed, the paper cream, the ink faded, the words spelling out an address she had never heard of in a town she had never been to, in a county in the Rocky Mountains that might as well have been the moon. She stared at all three of them. She did not touch anything. "Whose was this?" she said. Barnaby Thackeray folded his hands on the desk. "Miss Whitaker, the property this deed describes has belonged on paper to a man named Ambrose Whitaker for the better part of 40 years. He has, as of 11 months ago, passed away. The house, its grounds, and everything inside it are now yours." The room tilted. She heard her own voice from very far away. "Ambrose Whitaker. Yes, that was my father's name. That was your father's name." She sat there. She did not cry. She did not move. She thought instead about the sentence she had lived under for 22 years. He walked away, and how a sentence could stay perfectly still for that long, could sit on your chest like a stone, and then one morning some old lawyer in a cedar-smelling office could pick it up, turn it over, and you would see that underneath the whole time, there had been another sentence hiding. Where, she said, did he live? Barnaby Thackeray tapped the deed with one long finger. Elderwin Hollow, Colorado, a property known locally as the Hawthorne Sanctuary. Sanctuary. Yes, that's a strange word for a house. The old man looked at her for a long moment, and then he said the thing she would remember later when everything else had come loose. "Miss Whitaker, that is not a strange word for that house. That is the only word that has ever fit." She almost asked him what he meant. She didn't, because he stood up, because he handed her the box, because he told her the bus to Elderwin Hollow left from the Greyhound station on 19th Street the following morning at 5:40, and that a room had been paid for at the Elderwin Inn upon her arrival, and that everything else she needed to know was inside the house itself. "But, sir," she said at the door, "why now?" He smiled again, that same small, tired smile. "Because, Miss Whitaker, it was never now until you were ready." The bus climbed into the mountains at dawn. She sat by the window with her forehead against the glass. The world went past in slow waves of white and gray and dark, dark green. Pines so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. Snow so deep it swallowed the shoulders of the road. A herd of elk crossing a frozen creek at the edge of a meadow, their breath rising in silver columns. She had never seen anything like it. She had never known that a country could go so quiet. She held the cedar box on her lap the whole way. Every so often, when the bus rocked over a bad stretch of road, she felt the pocket watch shift. And every time it shifted, she thought about opening it. And every time she thought about opening it, something stopped her. Not fear, not exactly. Something more like, not yet. The bus stopped at a place called Cottonwood, and a woman with white hair and a bag of knitting got off. It stopped at a place called Pine Bluff. A man in a red plaid coat got on, nodded at her once, and fell asleep against the window across the aisle. It stopped at a place with no sign at all, and nobody got on or off, and the driver got out for a cigarette and stood in the snow with his shoulders hunched. Then, at 4 in the afternoon, when the light was already starting to go, the bus turned off the main highway and rolled down a narrow road she had not known was there. The sign as they passed said, Elderwin Hollow, Pop, 342. The bus let her off at the door of a diner with red curtains and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said, Home Cooking since 1948. The driver unloaded her backpack. He pointed up a road that disappeared into a wall of trees. Cabins up that way, miss. How far? 9 miles, give or take. 9. There's no taxi service out here. Right. You can wait till morning. Old Doc Kilbride's daughter runs the inn. She'd give you a room." "No," she said. "I want to see it tonight." He looked at her. He looked at the backpack. He looked at the cedar box she was still and had been all day holding against her chest like something alive. "Suit yourself," he said. "Watch for elk. And if you see any weather coming down off the ridge, you turn around. You hear me? You turn around." She heard him. She started walking anyway. The road climbed. The trees closed in. The snow crunched under her boots in a rhythm that matched her heart, and after the first mile her breath came in white plumes, and after the second her fingertips went from cold to numb, and after the third she stopped feeling her nose at all. But she kept walking, because she had spent 4 years walking away from things, and this was the first time in her life she had been walking toward something, toward what she did not know, toward whose she was beginning to suspect. The road bent left, and then right, and then at the top of a rise it opened, and she stopped. She stopped so hard she nearly fell, because it was not a cabin. It was not a cabin at all. It rose out of the mountainside like something a child had dreamed after reading too many old books. 4 stories tall, built of gray granite and dark timber, with a green slate roof and 100 windows glowing faintly gold in the last light of the afternoon. A wrap-around porch painted white ran the whole way around the ground floor. Above it, a second-story balcony, and above that, at the corner of the building, an octagonal turret rose 82 feet into the sky, capped with a copper cupola that had gone the color of a robin's egg from 100 winters of weather. 12 stained glass windows on the eastern gable, catching the light like a kaleidoscope. A granite fountain at the entrance frozen mid-cascade into a sculpture of ice. An iron gate at the head of the drive forged in the shape of climbing roses, and above the gate carved into the stone lintel, in letters worn but still legible, Ubi amor, ibi patria, where love is, there is home. She stood at the bottom of the drive. She could not move, because this was a mistake, because Barnaby Thackeray had made a mistake, or the deed had made a mistake, or the whole world had made a mistake, because places like this did not belong to girls like her. Places like this belonged to families with names carved into things. Places like this did not belong to 22-year-old women with olive green backpacks and 1 Bible and 1 dead mother and a father who walked away, except the brass key in her pocket was warm, except the pocket watch had started ticking just once, very quietly, when she had crossed the gate, except the front door, when she climbed the porch steps and stood in front of it, opened for her before she had turned the key, because the key fit, and because the lock, which looked as though it had not been touched in a season, turned with a soft click, and the door drifted inward, and the warm smell of cedar and old paper and something else, something like bread, something like Sunday, drifted out to meet her. She stepped inside. The lights were on, not all of them, not many, but enough. A single lamp in the front hall, a fire burning low in an enormous stone fireplace at the far end of the great room, a row of pillar candles on the mantel, flamed steady. Someone had lit them. Someone had been here recently. Her heart did something small and sharp inside her chest. "Hello," she said. Nothing. "Hello." The house held her voice for a second, and then let it go. She walked, because what else could she do? The great room stretched the length of the ground floor. A grand piano in one corner, its lid closed, a folded quilt draped across the bench. A library that rose 2 stories with a spiral staircase of dark wood curling up to the second-floor balcony, and every wall from floor to ceiling packed with books. Not the kind of books people bought to decorate, the kind of books people read, their spines cracked, their edges soft, a dining table long enough to seat 20, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and beside it on a small table, a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses, and an open book, face down, as if someone had set it there, just for a minute, and meant to come right back. She did not touch the book. She could not, for reasons she could not explain, bring herself to touch the book. She walked into the kitchen. The kitchen was warm. There was a kettle on the stove, cold, but the burner beneath it was still faintly warm, as if it had been used that morning, or the day before, or sometime. She turned in a slow circle. She noticed the pantry door. She noticed the pencil marks on the inside of the pantry door. She noticed them because they were exactly at the height of her eyes. She stopped. She stepped closer, and she read. There were 22 marks, 22, each one dated, each one labeled, and beside each one in the same careful handwriting, one word, Ophira. She reached out. Very slowly, she placed her palm flat against the door. Her fingers found the mark labeled Ophira age 3, then Ophira age 4, then 5, then 6, then 7. She read them all, and beside each one written in slightly smaller letters, a verse. Isaiah 43:1, I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. Psalm 139:13, for thou didst form my inward parts. Deuteronomy 31:6, he will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. She sank to her knees on the kitchen floor. She did not cry. She could not cry, because the sound that wanted to come out of her was not a sound a person can make in a house where you are not sure you are alone. Because how? Because how? Because she had never been here. She had never set foot in this state until yesterday. She had been in Denver and Wichita and 2 foster homes in eastern Colorado and an efficiency apartment in Aurora with a boyfriend who broke her thumb. She had never come near this mountain. She had never come near this door. Yet somebody had measured her. Every year, since she was 3, somebody had guessed. Somebody had believed she was growing. Somebody had marked it down. She pressed her forehead against the pantry door. She whispered the only thing she could think to say. Who did this? The house did not answer, but somewhere in another room she could have sworn. She heard a clock tick just once. She did not sleep in a bed that night. She could not. The idea of choosing a room, of climbing under blankets that had been folded and refolded by hands that did not belong to her, of behaving in any way as if she belonged to this place, it was too much. Instead, she sat in the rocking chair beside the fireplace. She wrapped herself in the folded quilt. She let the fire burn low, and she watched the front door. She did not know what she was watching for. Maybe him, maybe whoever had come and lit the lamp and left the kettle on the stove, maybe her father. Except her father was dead. The lawyer had said so. 11 months. She said the number out loud to make it real. 11 months. The word hung in the air like a breath in cold weather. 11 months ago, she had been sleeping in a bus station in Colorado Springs. 11 months ago, she had eaten a stale donut for breakfast and cried in the women's bathroom because a man on the platform had followed her 3 blocks. 11 months ago, her father had been alive. She had missed him by a year, less than a year. She thought this, and then she thought, how can you miss a man you have never met? And then she thought, the answer is that you can. You can miss him more than anyone else in the world, because a man you have never met is a man you have imagined every single day of your life, which means you have loved him, which means the missing is not new, it is only named. She did not sleep, not really, not until the fire had burned down to embers and the sky beyond the tall windows had started to turn that particular pearl color that meant snow was coming, and even then she did not sleep so much as fall. She fell into a place that was not quite dreaming, and in that place she thought she heard a man's voice, speaking her name very softly, the way a father might say the name of a sleeping child. She woke to the sound of knocking, 3 slow knocks. She sat up. Her neck was stiff. The fire was out. The house was dim, but there was a strange gray brightness at the windows that meant fresh snow, and she could see her breath, and the knock came again. 3 slow knocks. She stood. She was still wearing her coat, still wearing her boots. She walked to the door. She did not open it right away. She looked through the small pane of glass beside it. There was an old man on the porch. He was tall, very tall. Even stooped as he was, he stood a full head above her. He wore a heavy wool coat the color of oatmeal and a knit cap the color of moss, and he leaned on a walking stick made of some pale, twisted wood she did not recognize. His face was long, his eyes were pale, his skin was the color of old paper. He was looking at the door, but he was not looking at her. She had the distinct, uncomfortable feeling that he was looking through the door, at something behind her, at the rocking chair, at the fireplace, at the room he had already somehow seen before. She opened the door a crack. Yes. The old man's eyes came to hers. He smiled. It was a warm smile. It did not touch his eyes. "My dear girl," he said, "you must be Miss Whittaker." "Yes." "May I come in?" "Who are you?" "My name is Percival Aldrich. I was a very old friend of your father's." She did not answer for a long moment. She thought about the lawyer, about the way he had said, "That is not mine to tell." She thought about how nobody in 22 years had ever come to a shelter or a foster home or a caseworker's office claiming to have been a friend of her father's. Not one, not ever, until now, until she owned this house. "Come in," she said. She stepped back. He stepped over the threshold. He looked around the great room, and she watched him look, and she watched his eyes. They did not widen, they did not soften, they did not do any of the things eyes do when they see a beautiful thing for the first time. They moved over the room the way a man moves over a chessboard, piece by piece, corner by corner, counting. She noticed. She did not know why she noticed. She just did. "You must be so overwhelmed," he said. "I am." Ambrose was a private man, so people keep telling me. He did not, I imagine, prepare you for any of this. No. Have you found the letters yet? She went very still. She had not told anyone about any letters, because she had not yet found any letters, and because he was standing in her great room at 9 in the morning asking about them as if he already knew they existed. "What letters?" she said. He turned his head. Slowly, he looked at her, and the warm smile came back, and it was again a very warm smile. "Forgive me, dear girl, I only mean, your father was a great correspondent. I would not be surprised if he left something for you, something personal." "I see. Have you had a chance to look through the desk?" "No. Or the study?" "I don't know where the study is." "Ah," he smiled again. "Perhaps I could help you. I know this house rather well. I could give you a tour. I could point out the important places." She looked at him. She was 22 years old. She had grown up in the system. She had learned before she was old enough to spell the word that the world contained certain men, and that those men often had very warm smiles, and that the trick to surviving them was not to trust the smile. It was to trust the thing in your chest that noticed the smile did not reach the eyes. Her chest was noticing. Her chest was noticing very loudly. "That's kind of you," she said, "but I think I need to be alone for a while." "Of course. I've only just arrived." Of course. Perhaps another day. Perhaps. He did not move. He stood in her front hall. He leaned on his stick, and he looked at her with those pale, patient eyes, and he said in a voice so gentle she almost missed the shape of what was underneath it, "Miss Whitaker, yes, there are in a house like this certain things that belong to a family, and certain things that do not. You will find as you get to know Ambrose's affairs that not everything under this roof was strictly speaking his to leave." "What do you mean?" "I mean only that, should you find anything that does not seem to belong, I would be very grateful if you would set it aside and call me before you do anything with it." "What kind of thing?" "Papers, my dear, only papers, old correspondence, financial records, the sorts of things that could be misunderstood if they fell into the wrong hands." She held his gaze. She did not blink. "I will keep that in mind," she said. "Please do." He tipped his cap. He turned. He walked back down the porch steps and down the snowy path and through the iron gate and into the road, and she watched him until he disappeared around the bend of the pines. Then she closed the door. Then she locked it. Then she leaned her back against it, and she slid down until she was sitting on the floor, and she pressed her hands against her mouth because her hands were shaking, because he had known about the letters, because he had known about the letters before she had, and because whoever her father had been, whatever he had done, whatever silence had cost him 22 years of a daughter, he had measured on a pantry door. Percival Aldrich did not want her to find out. She spent the rest of that morning walking through the house. She walked slowly, room by room. She did not touch anything unless she had to. She was afraid, and she did not know exactly what she was afraid of, and that made everything sharper. The house was enormous, 41 rooms, she counted. Bedrooms on the second floor, most of them furnished, none of them slept in. A nursery with a rocking horse the color of cream, and a mobile of hand-carved wooden stars that turned very slowly when she opened the door, as if the air remembered how to move it. A music room with a violin case on a stand, empty, the velvet inside worn to a shine in the shape of an instrument that had been lifted out and never put back. A dining hall, a conservatory with a domed glass ceiling, and inside the conservatory rows and rows of pots, most of them empty, most of them dry, except one, except in the far corner, beneath the widest pane of the glass ceiling, a small apple tree in a large ceramic planter. And when she went closer, and when she knelt, she saw that the soil around its roots was damp, recently watered. She did not know what to do with that. She backed out of the conservatory, slowly, as if the tree might at any moment turn its head and look at her. She kept walking. She found a laundry room with a stack of neatly folded sheets. She found a mud room with a row of walking sticks, and on a hook near the door, an old wool coat that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and rain. She did not touch the coat. She found the study on the second floor. She found it because the door was locked. Every other door in the house was open. Every other door had let her in. But this door, at the end of a long hallway, beneath a small round window that looked out over the frozen valley, this door was locked. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she remembered the cedar box, the small brass key that had been at the bottom of it, tied to a length of blue ribbon, the folded note beneath it in that same familiar handwriting. Some doors should never be forced. When you are ready, you will know which one this opens. She was ready, whatever ready meant. She was somehow at this moment in this hallway, in this house that had been measuring her for 22 years ready. She fitted the key into the lock. She turned. She heard the click. The door swung inward. The room beyond was small, a study exactly as she had expected, one wall of books, an oak desk in front of a window, an antique typewriter on the desk, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses beside the typewriter folded as if their owner had just taken them off, and on every other flat surface in the room, on the desk and the shelves and the little side table by the reading chair, letters, bundles of them, tied with faded blue ribbon. She walked to the desk. She did not sit down, not yet. She lifted the top bundle. She untied the ribbon with fingers that did not feel like her own. She turned the first envelope over. The front was inscribed in the handwriting she was starting to know. To my daughter, age 3. She stopped breathing. She set it down. She lifted the next one. To my daughter, age 4. The next. To my daughter, age 5. The next, the next, the next. She dropped to her knees on the study floor. She pulled bundles down from the shelves. She untied the ribbons. She spread the envelopes around her in a wide, silent, terrible circle, and she read them. 6. You started kindergarten today. I watched you walk into the building from across the street. You were carrying a red lunchbox. You dropped it in the parking lot. You picked it up. You cried for a moment, and then a woman I did not know knelt down, and she said something to you, and you laughed. I have never been so grateful to a stranger in my life. 9. You lost your first tooth this year. I do not know when, I do not know how, but I know it happened because I saw you at your school Christmas concert, and when you sang, the space where the tooth had been was there in your smile. I stood in the back of the auditorium. I did not stay long because your foster mother might have seen me, and because I did not trust myself to see you again and still walk away. 12. Today you turned 12. I baked a small cake. I lit the candles. I sat at this desk, and I ate a piece for you. 15. You have run away from your foster placement. I know because I still have friends at the county. I know where you are sleeping. I know you are safe more or less. I know you are not eating enough. I have wired money to the shelter where you spent last night anonymously marked for the youth fund. Please, please eat. Please, my darling, please eat. 18. Today you aged out of the system. This is the day I have dreaded and prayed for since the year you were born, because now no one is watching over you except me, and I am so far away, and I am so tired, and I am so sorry. 20. You spent last night in the shelter downtown. Ida gave you the cot by the window. Ida is kind, my love. She has always been kind. She once let me leave money for a girl I could not name. 21. You will be 22 soon, and I have made peace with the fact that I will not in this life hear you call me anything at all. But I want you to know, if you are ever reading this, I am not sorry that I loved you. I am only sorry that I could not love you in the way a father is supposed to love his daughter, out in the open, out loud, out where the world could see. I chose the other way. I chose the way that kept you breathing. I would choose it again. Please believe me, I would choose it again." She could not read any more. She sat on the study floor, her knees to her chest, her mother's Bible in her lap, her father's letters spread around her like the leaves of some slow private tree, and she made a sound she had never made in her life, a sound she did not know her body could make. She cried the way a woman cries when a sentence she has lived under for 22 years finally breaks. He walked away. He had not walked away. I had never once in her whole life walked away. Outside, the snow came down in slow, forgiving flakes. Inside, she sat on the study floor and wept for a father she had known for 437 pages. And on the desk above her head, the antique pocket watch, which she had set down there when she had come in, and which had not moved since Barnaby Thackeray had first opened the cedar box, ticked once. She stayed in the study until the light through the window turned blue. Then it turned dark. Then she rose. On stiff legs, she dried her face with the sleeve of the wool coat that was still wrapped around her, though she could not remember putting it on. She looked at the ceiling, because the study had a ceiling, but the study was not the top of the house. The house had a turret, an octagonal turret, rising 82 feet above the second floor. She had not yet gone up. She wiped her face again. She walked to the desk. She picked up the pocket watch. She fitted it into her coat pocket, and she left the study. She did not lock it behind her. She could not somehow bring herself to lock it. She found the door to the turret at the far end of the second-story balcony, a narrow door, painted the color of the walls so that unless you were looking for it, you would not know it was there. It was not locked. She turned the handle. She opened it, and behind it was a wooden staircase spiraling up into the dark. She climbed. The stairs creaked beneath her. The air grew colder. The walls, which had been painted plaster on the second floor, became stone, and then higher up became timber, and then at the very top became glass. She emerged into a small octagonal room, 8 windows, one for each direction of the compass, and in the center of the room, on a heavy wooden tripod, a brass telescope, its polished tube longer than her arm, facing, not up, facing the north window, angled down. She stopped in the doorway. She stared at it, because a telescope in a house like this, in a place like this, in a turret like this, should be pointing up at the stars, at the moon, at the great unblinking indifferent bowl of the Colorado sky. It was not pointing up, it was pointing down, at the road that came up out of Elderwin Hollow, wound through the pines, and bent at the top of the rise to reveal the iron gate. She walked to it, she bent, she put her eye to the eyepiece, and she looked. She saw the road, she saw the gate, she saw the far bend where the pines closed in and hid the last mile of the drive from town. She saw that whoever had positioned this telescope had positioned it to watch who came up the mountain. Beside the tripod on a small table there was a leather-bound journal, thick, the pages soft with use. She opened it. The first date at the top of the first page was written in careful ink, October 3rd, 2003, the year she was 1. The entries went down the page, down the next, each one a single line, a gray sedan, Colorado plates, man mid-40s, did not stop, A black pickup, Wyoming plates. Two men slowed at the gate, did not stop. A brown coupe, Denver plates. One man stopped for 11 minutes. Left. A silver station wagon, Colorado plates. A woman and a child turned around at the fork, line after line, page after page, year after year. She flipped forward. She flipped forward for a very long time. The last entry was dated 4 months ago. A dark blue town car. Denver plates. One man, very tall, walking stick, stopped at the gate, did not enter, watched the house for 41 minutes, left at dusk. She stared at the page. She read it again. She looked up, through the north window, down the road, down where the pines swallowed the last bend of the drive, where a man had stood 4 months ago and watched this house for 41 minutes and left. She thought about Percival Aldridge. She thought about his walking stick. She thought about his warm smile that did not reach his eyes. She closed the journal. She sat down on the wooden floor of the turret, her back against the tripod, her mother's Bible still in her arms, her breath coming shallow and fast, because her father had not built this turret to watch the stars, because her father had not built this house to live in, because for 22 years in a hidden room at the top of a house, at the top of a mountain, at the top of a hollow, at the top of a road nobody ever drove, Ambrose Whitaker had been standing at the window with a brass telescope pointed down, watching for the men who were coming for her. She sat there in the turret for a long time. The wind rose. The chimes on the porch 4 floors below began to ring in that slow, uneven, almost human way old chimes ring, and through the north window, past the frost that had started to form on the glass, she saw far down the road, at the very edge of what the eye could still catch in the failing light, a single pair of headlights turning off the highway, coming up the mountain. The headlights climbed for 11 minutes. Ophira counted. She counted because counting was the only thing she could do with her hands that did not involve running, because running was not an option, because she was 22 years old and alone at the top of a turret, at the top of a mountain, and whoever was coming up her road had a car, and she did not. 11 minutes. Then the headlights stopped, not at the gate, halfway. She held her breath. She waited for them to move again. They did not. She counted to 60, then to 100, then to 200, and the headlights just stayed there. 2 small yellow eyes in the middle of her road, unblinking, patient, as if whoever was inside the car was in no hurry at all, as if whoever was inside the car was waiting for her to do something first. She lowered the eyepiece. She wiped her hands on her jeans. She went down the turret stairs faster than she had come up, down the balcony hall, down the grand staircase, through the great room, into the front hall, to the door, where she stopped, because what was she going to do? Open it and walk out onto the porch, wave at the headlights. "Excuse me, sir, are you here to murder me, or is this a wrong turn?" She almost laughed. The laugh caught in her throat and turned into something else. She reached instead for the switch beside the door, the one that controlled the porch light. She flipped it off. The house went dark. Then she went to the front window. She pulled the curtain back 1 inch. She looked. The headlights turned, slowly, as if the driver had made a decision. They swung in a slow half circle at the bend of the road, and then they were pointing back down the mountain, and then they were gone. The sound of the engine faded through the pines, and she was alone again with her heart and her breathing and the dark house at her back. She stood there for a long time. Then she said out loud to nobody, "Not tonight." Her voice came out steadier than she expected, which surprised her, which also, if she was being honest, which also scared her a little, because it meant something in her was changing, something in her was deciding. At 7 the next morning, someone knocked on her door, 3 slow knocks. She sat up in the rocking chair. She had at some point during the night actually slept. She did not know when. She knew only that the fire had gone out again, and her mouth tasted like copper, and her mother's Bible was still open on her lap to the page she had fallen asleep reading. She stood, she smoothed her hair, she looked at the door, and she thought very clearly, if that is Percival Aldrich, I am going to hit him with the fire poker. She walked to the door. She looked through the pane. It was not Percival Aldrich. It was a small woman in a heavy blue coat, 70, maybe 72, white hair in a soft twist under a knit cap, cheeks pink from the cold, and in her gloved hands a basket covered with a red check cloth. The woman was smiling. The smile touched her eyes. Ophira noticed. Ophira unlocked the door. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Good morning. I am so sorry to come by this early." "It's fine. I would have called first, but your father never did put a phone in this house, and I did not know if you were the sort of girl who used one." Ophira did not know what to say to that. The woman held out the basket. "I brought you bread and soup and a jar of my apple butter because it is December, and nobody, not one soul on this earth, should spend December without apple butter. Ma'am, Eudora, Eudora, please, do I know you?" The woman lowered the basket. Her face did a thing, a small, complicated thing, as if she had been rehearsing this moment for a long, long time, and now that it was here, she was finding that she had forgotten every one of her lines. "No," she said, "you do not, but I have known you, child, since you were 3 days old." Ophira stared at her. The woman waited. Ophira stepped back. "Come inside," she said. They sat at the kitchen table. Eudora Fairfax set the basket down. She unpacked it piece by piece. The bread was still warm. Ophira could smell it. The soup was chicken and rice in a thermos with a dented lid. The apple butter came in a mason jar with a hand-lettered label that said in a neat schoolteacher hand, "E. Fairfax. October." Eudora set a small loaf on the wooden cutting board. She sliced it. She spread apple butter on a slice. She pushed the slice across the table without saying a word. Ophira picked it up. She had not eaten in almost a day. She took a bite. Her eyes filled, not because it was good, though it was good, because for the first time in more years than she wanted to count, someone had made her food. Someone had gotten up. Someone had baked. Someone had put on a coat and driven up a mountain in December and set a slice of bread in front of her. She could not speak. Eudora poured coffee, waited, watched her eat. When Ophira could speak, she said, "How did you know him?" Eudora set down the coffee pot. She folded her hands. "I was the town librarian in Elderwin Hollow for 39 years. Okay, your father used the library very often. He was, my dear, a great reader." "That is not, I think, the whole answer." Eudora smiled. "No, it is not." She reached into her coat pocket. She drew out a small object. She placed it on the table between them. It was a silver locket, oval, tarnished with age, on a thin chain. Ophira did not touch it. "I wanted you to have it," Eudora said. "He asked me before he asked me to give it to you when you came." "When was that?" 11 months ago. You have been carrying this for 11 months. Yes. Why? Eudora looked at her. Her eyes were pale gray, older than her face, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and refused out of pure stubbornness to become bitter. Because she said, I promised him that I would not put it in the mail, that I would put it in your hand, that I would look at you when I did, so that you would know. Know what? That someone had loved this thing before you did. Ophira reached across the table. She lifted the locket. She turned it over. On the back, in tiny letters worn almost smooth by years of somebody's thumb, were 4 words. Until we meet again. She held it very tightly. She thought, until we meet again. She thought he wrote that to me on a piece of silver. She thought he wrote that to me, knowing we never would. She opened the clasp. Inside on the left was a lock of very dark hair, tied with a scrap of red thread. Inside on the right was a tiny photograph. A young woman, 24, 25, fair hair, a crooked smile, holding a baby against her collarbone. Ophira went very still, because she had never seen the woman's face before, because she had never seen a picture of her mother, because for 22 years her mother had been a smell lavender and a feeling gentle hands on her hair and a Bible with a cracked cover, and now she had a face. She had a face, and the baby against the collarbone was Ophira. She knew it, the way you know your own reflection. She lowered her head. She pressed the locket against her mouth. She did not sob. She just breathed, very slowly, in, out, because if she let herself sob, she was not sure she would be able to stop. Eudora reached across the table. She placed her hand on Ophira's wrist. The hand was small and warm, and it did not tremble. Her name was Rosalind, Eudora said. I know. She was the finest woman I have ever known. How? How what, sweetheart? How did you know her? Eudora did not answer right away. She sat with her hand on Ophira's wrist, and she looked at the girl in front of her, and her old, careful, watchful mouth worked around a sentence she was not yet ready to speak. Not today, she said finally. Eudora, not today, sweetheart. Please. Some things, Eudora said, come out in their own time, or they come out wrong, and they cannot go back in. Ophira did not push. She did not know why she did not push. She only knew that when Eudora Fairfax said, not today, she meant it in a way that made her think, this woman is not withholding. This woman is protecting me from a thing she thinks I am not yet quite ready to carry. And so she nodded, and she ate another slice of bread, and Eudora smiled at her, and put on her coat, and promised to come back the next day, and left a jar of apple butter on the counter, and Ophira watched her walk down the path with her small, careful steps in the fresh snow, and Ophira thought, she knows everything. She has known everything the whole time. She spent the rest of that morning in the study. She read the letters in order, age 3, age 4, age 5. She read the letter from the year she was 7, in which her father described watching her from across the parking lot of an elementary school she had by then been kicked out of. She read the letter from the year she was 10, in which he described the little wooden horse he had carved for her Christmas and packed in a box, and then at the last minute could not send, because sending it would have meant she could be found. She found the horse. It was on a shelf above the desk. She had not seen it the day before. It was 6 inches tall, carved of pale wood. The mane was fine and the tail lifted, as if the horse were about to run. Its little brass nail eyes caught the light. She picked it up. She turned it over. On the underside of its belly, in pencil, almost invisible, in her father's writing, "For my little girl, Christmas, age 6. She set it very gently back on the shelf. She said out loud, "Hi, Dad." The house did not answer, but the pocket watch on the desk, which had been silent since the moment she had set it down in the turret the night before, ticked twice. That afternoon she went into town. She needed food. She needed a hat that was warmer than the one she owned. She needed to look at other human beings and remember that they existed. The diner with the red curtains had a name, it turned out. It was called the Iron Skillet. The waitress was a girl about her age with a nose ring and a name tag that read Tess. Tess took her order without small talk. Tess brought her coffee. Tess brought her eggs. Tess set the plate down and stood there for a second longer than she needed to. "You're the girl." "Excuse me." "Ambrose Whitaker's girl, the one up at the sanctuary." Ophira froze. "How do you know?" Tess shrugged. "Town of 342 people, ma'am. Sanctuary don't get visitors. Anyone new walks in this door, we know within an hour." "Oh, he was a good man. You knew him." "Not really. He came in twice a month, sat right there, that booth by the window. He always ordered the same thing: oatmeal, extra cinnamon, black coffee. He always left a $20 tip on a $9 tab. He came in twice a month, for as long as I can remember, until last winter. Yeah, he got sick. My daddy delivered his groceries the last few months, said he was quiet at the end." Ophira did not answer. She looked at the booth by the window. She could imagine it: a tall man, wire-rimmed glasses, a wool coat, sitting there every other Wednesday, eating oatmeal alone, because she was not there, because he had chosen that she would not be there. She wanted suddenly very badly to hit something. She did not. She thanked Tess. She ate her eggs. She left a $20 tip on a $9 tab because she did not have 20 extra dollars, because she did it anyway. Walking out of the diner, she passed a small building she had not noticed the night before. White clapboard, a steeple, a hand-painted sign that read Elder Wynn Hollow Community Church, and on the sign in fresh chalk, "Welcome all, always." The door was open. She did not know why she went in. She just did. The sanctuary was small, 12 pews, plain wooden cross on the far wall, a single stained glass window above the altar, blue and gold, depicting a woman kneeling in a garden. There was no one inside. She sat in the back pew. She had not been in a church since she was 6. She did not know if she believed in anything anymore. She did not know if she ever had. She only knew that she was tired and that her mother's Bible had been in her backpack for 4 winters, and that some small piece of her, some piece she thought she had killed a long time ago, still knew how to fold its hands. She folded them. She did not pray. Exactly. She just breathed in this warm, quiet room with the smell of old hymnals and candle wax and pine floor cleaner, and the winter light coming blue through the window above the altar. And she thought, "I do not know if you are there, but if you are, thank you for the bread this morning. Thank you for the apple butter. Thank you for the woman who made them." Behind her a door opened. Quiet footsteps. She did not turn around. A voice low and warm from the aisle behind her. "Take your time, honey. I'm not in any hurry." The voice belonged to a black woman in her late 60s, in a heavy wool cardigan and a pastor's collar. She had a soft, round face and steel-rimmed glasses and hands folded in front of her, and she was smiling at Ophira with a smile that reached very clearly the whole way up to her eyes. Ophira stood up. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I didn't mean to. I just—" "Sit down, honey." Ophira sat down. The woman came and sat in the pew across the aisle from her. "I'm Reverend O'Daly's Kilbride, Ophira Whitaker. I know who you are, sweet girl." "Everyone does, apparently." Reverend Kilbride laughed. It was a low, honest laugh, the kind of laugh that had heard every kind of confession and been surprised by none of them. "Well, this is a small town, so I'm learning. How you settling in?" "I don't know." "That is the most honest answer I have heard in this church in about 6 months." Ophira found herself smiling. The smile surprised her. The Reverend leaned forward slightly. "Your daddy was a friend of mine, ma'am. 21 years. Ophira did not speak. She waited. Reverend Kilbride looked at her hands. "He came to this church on Sunday mornings, always sat in the third pew from the back. He never took communion, but he sang the hymns, softly, because that man could not carry a tune to save his life." Ophira laughed, just once, wetly. "He did something for me one time, something I never told anybody." "What?" "My son, 12 years ago. He had gotten into some trouble down in Denver. Bad trouble, legal trouble, nothing violent, but the kind of trouble that would have followed him the rest of his life. And I did not have the money to fix it. I did not know I had told your father about it. But I must have, because one Wednesday morning I walked out of my house, and there was an envelope on my porch, and in the envelope was a check for exactly the amount my boy needed, and underneath it, in pencil, in your father's handwriting, only 4 words. What did it say? For a mother's son." Ophira put her hand over her mouth. "He did that. He did that. For your son. For my son. How many other times did he do that?" Reverend Kilbride looked at her. "Sweet girl, I am not the only person in this valley he did that for." "How many people?" The Reverend paused for a long time. Then she said in a voice so gentle it barely disturbed the air, "I don't know exactly, but I sit in this church every Sunday morning, and I know of at least 30 families who owe him something, and most of them do not know they do." Ophira lowered her hands. She looked at the blue and gold window above the altar. She walked back up to the sanctuary that afternoon in a light snow. She was thinking so hard she almost missed him. Almost. He was standing at the iron gate, not inside, just outside, leaning on his walking stick, looking up at the house. Percival Aldridge. His breath rose in slow gray plumes. He turned when he heard her footsteps. He smiled. "Miss Whitaker." "Mr. Aldridge. I was in the neighborhood." "Were you? I thought I would check on you." "Kind of you. Have you had a chance to look through the study?" She did not answer that question. Instead, she asked one of her own. "How did you know my father?" He tilted his head. "I told you. We were friends. Old friends. Very old friends." "For how long?" "Oh, my dear, longer than you have been alive." "Then why does no one in this town seem to remember you?" The smile did not slip, but something behind the smile did, just for a fraction of a second. She saw it. "They are a private people," he said. "Very insular. I have not been up this way in many years." "Uh-huh. May I come inside for a moment? It is very cold." "No." "Excuse me." "No, Mr. Aldridge. I would like to be alone this afternoon." He looked at her for a long, long moment, and she looked back at him, because she was 22 years old and she had been sleeping in shelters and warehouse doorways since she was 18, and she knew in some old, bone-deep way when a man was calculating what he could get away with. She held his eyes. She did not blink. He blinked first. "Of course," he said. "Forgive me. I only meant to be helpful." "I know what you meant." "Very well. Another day." "Perhaps." He turned. He walked back down the road toward town, and she stood at the gate and watched until he was out of sight. And then she waited 3 more minutes, and then she waited 2 more, because she did not entirely trust that he was gone. Then she went inside. She locked the door behind her. She checked every window on the first floor. Every window was locked, except one, except the small window in the pantry, the one just above the pencil marks, which was when she reached up to check it, not locked, and which had been when she had checked it 2 days before, locked. She stood in the pantry. She stared up at the window. She thought about Percival Aldrich asking her, on their very first meeting, if she had found the letters yet. She thought about the way he had asked on their second meeting if she had looked through the study. She thought about the little apple tree in the conservatory, the one with the damp soil, the one that had been watered by somebody. Recently, she thought, somebody has been coming in here, she thought. Somebody has been coming in here for 11 months. That night she did not sit in the rocking chair. She lit a lamp in the study, and she carried it up the 2 flights to the turret, and she sat down on the wooden floor beside the brass telescope with her mother's Bible in her lap and Eudora's silver locket around her neck, and she began systematically to search the study. She pulled down every book on every shelf. She looked behind every one. She lifted the corner of the rug. She checked the underside of the desk. She checked the back panels of the drawers. She checked the fireplace, though there was no fireplace in the study, so instead she checked the inside of the stovepipe that ran up through the wall, and she got soot in her hair, but she also found nothing. She was ready to give up. She sat back on her heels, and she looked one more time at the desk, the typewriter, the wire-rimmed reading glasses, the little tray beside them with 2 pencils and a rubber eraser and a small brass compass with a hairline crack across its glass face. She lifted the compass. She turned it over. Underneath, taped to the back with a piece of yellowed masking tape, was a key, a small iron key, not brass, not the family, iron, different. She untaped it. She stared at it. She thought, what door in this house have I not opened? She thought the conservatory has a small door in the back, behind the apple tree. I did not open it because I was afraid to walk close to the apple tree. She thought time to walk close to the apple tree. She went down. The conservatory was cold, colder than it should have been. She could see her breath. She crossed the flagstone floor. She stood in front of the apple tree. The soil around its roots was still damp. There was, she noticed now, a small watering can beside the pot, enamel, green, very old, with a chip on the spout. She knelt. She did not touch the watering can. She did not touch the tree. She only looked at the door behind it. The door was small, barely 5 feet high, made of iron banded with dark strips of metal, set into the back stone wall of the conservatory. She had not the day before thought of it as a door. She had thought of it as decoration. She fitted the iron key. She turned. The door swung open. Stone steps, going down. She swallowed. She swallowed the fear the way she had learned to swallow every hard thing in her life, which was without water, in one long ugly gulp, and then she went down. The stairs spiraled. The air grew cold in a different way, the way basements are cold, the way old cellars are cold. She could smell earth and old paper and the faint iron tang of something like a spring. She reached the bottom. She stopped. Because the room was not a room. The room was an archive. Filing cabinets, 12 of them, along one wall, steel, battered, labeled in the same familiar hand, Ainsworth Mining, 1998, Ainsworth Mining, 1999, Ainsworth Mining 2000, all the way through last year, along the other wall shelves, boxes and boxes of neatly labeled manila folders, boxes of photographs, cassette tapes in plastic sleeves labeled with names and dates. At the far end of the room, a desk, and on the desk, a leather-bound journal, thicker than the one in the turret, older. She walked to it. She lifted it. She opened it. The first page was dated April 4th, 2001, the year she had been born, in her father's writing. Rosalind has been asking questions. She has been asking questions for weeks. She thinks the stream at the north end of the Ainsworth parcel has been contaminated. She is right. I have run the samples myself. Barium, arsenic, 2 levels of contamination that should not exist in a stream that has not been touched by permitted operation. Someone is dumping. She turned the page. May 12, 2001. Rosalind has confirmed it. She spoke to a foreman named Grady, who is willing to testify. He says the runoff is being diverted at night. He says 3 of the county commissioners have been receiving envelopes for 2 years. He says he is afraid. She turned the page. June 3rd, 2001. Grady is dead. Car accident on the switchbacks north of Elderwin. His brake lines were, according to his son, freshly serviced last week. The son called me. He is 19. He is very frightened. She turned the page. July 1st, 2001. Rosalind is pregnant. We are having a girl. I have never been so afraid and so happy in my life. Ophira sat down on the cold stone floor of the archive. She read. She read for 2 hours. She read past midnight. She read her mother's slow and steady discovery of a scandal that reached from a small mining operation in the Rocky Mountains all the way up to the office of a state senator. She read about county commissioners. She read about payment ledgers. She read about a shell company in Nevada that funneled hush money to widows. And then she read the entry dated August 14th, 2003. Rosalind is dead. Just those 3 words, alone on a whole page. She turned the page. August 15th, 2003. They took her. They took her and they made it look like a hospital error. The chart was falsified. The nurse on duty has been transferred to Wyoming. The attending physician has retired to Arizona. The autopsy has been sealed at the request of a doctor who is on the payroll of a man who is on the payroll of the vice president of Ainsworth. I know all of it. I can prove none of it. Yet. She turned the page. August 16th, 2003. Ophira is with Eudora tonight. She does not understand why I am not there. She is asking for her mother. God forgive me. God forgive me. God forgive me for what I am about to do. She turned the page. August 17th, 2003. Tomorrow I will drive my truck off the Old Mill Road. I have paid a mechanic in Grand Junction to certify it as accidental. I have paid a coroner in Denver to sign a death certificate. I have paid Barnaby Thackeray to file the paperwork and take custody of my will. I will disappear because they will not stop with Rosalind, because they will come for Ophira next, because if Ophira is the daughter of a dead man, she is not worth killing, because if Ophira is the daughter of a man who is still publicly alive, she is a hostage. God, God help me. I do not know how to be a father this way. I only know I cannot be a father any other way. And keep her breathing. She turned the page. Blank. She turned it again. Blank. She flipped forward through the journal. Blank, 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 and then near the very end, September 8th, 2023, 11 months ago. The doctor says 3 months, perhaps 4. Genetic. My father had it. His father had it. Ophira must be tested. Eudora will see to it. Once I am gone, I have written her a letter for every year of her life. I do not know if she will ever read them. I do not know if she will ever forgive me. I only know that if I have done my job, if I have done my job right, she will be alive to hate me, which is more than I dared to hope for. When they took her mother, she closed the journal. She sat on the floor of the archive. She could not for a long minute breathe, because her mother had not died. Her mother had been killed, because her father had not walked away. Her father had disappeared to make sure she would not be next, because Barnaby Thackeray, the old lawyer, had known everything from the beginning, because Eudora Fairfax, the librarian, had known everything from the beginning, because Percival Aldrich had this morning asked her if she had looked through the study, because Percival Aldrich was still 22 years later working for the people who had murdered her mother. She stood up. She was shaking. She was not shaking with fear. She was shaking with rage. She climbed the stone stairs. She locked the iron door behind her. She crossed the conservatory, and as she passed the apple tree, she stopped, because she saw, on the enamel watering can, a small green sticker, the kind that peels off a plant tag at a nursery, and the sticker had been half scraped away, but there was still just enough of the writing left to read. E. Fairfax, Eudora. Eudora had been coming here all 11 months, watering her father's apple tree. Ophira sat down on the flagstone floor of the conservatory. She started to laugh, not because it was funny, because the whole world had turned inside out and she did not know what else to do with her mouth. She thought Eudora Fairfax has been walking up this mountain in the snow every week for 11 months to water the last tree my father ever planted. She thought nobody does that. Nobody does that unless. She stopped laughing. She stood up. She wiped her eyes. She went to bed. For the first time since she had come to the sanctuary, she went to bed in an actual bed. She chose the small bedroom on the second floor with the window that faced east. She pulled back the covers. She got in. She kept her mother's Bible on the pillow beside her, and she said out loud into the dark, "You are going to tell me tomorrow." She meant Eudora. But somewhere in some other part of the house, she thought she heard the pocket watch tick just once, as if her father, wherever he was, had heard her and agreed. At 6 the next morning, she was already dressed. At 6:30, she was making coffee. At 7, when the 3 slow knocks came, she was ready. She opened the door. Eudora Fairfax stood on the porch in her heavy blue coat, the basket in her hand, the same soft, watchful expression on her face. Ophira looked at her. She did not speak. Eudora looked back. The old woman's mouth trembled just for a second, and then she straightened her shoulders, and she said in a very quiet voice, "You went down. I went down. You read it. I read all of it. All right. Come in." Eudora stepped inside. Ophira closed the door. They stood in the front hall. Ophira did not offer to take her coat. She said, "Eudora." "Yes, sweetheart." "Who are you?" Eudora Fairfax set the basket down very carefully on the front hall table. Her old hands rested on the handle for a moment as if she were letting something go. Then she looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "My given name," she said, "is Eudora Rose Ellery. Fairfax was my married name. My husband died in 1998. I never had children of my own." "Okay." "Rosalind Ellery," Eudora said. "Your mother was my sister, my baby sister. There were 8 years between us. I was 28 when she was born. I held her the day she came home from the hospital." Ophira put her hand on the wall, because otherwise she thought she might fall down. "You," she said. "Yes, you are. I am your aunt's sweet girl. You are my aunt. I am, and you have known where I was every day of your life, and you did not come." Eudora Fairfax's face broke. There was no other word for it. 22 years of held-in composure fell apart. She sank down onto the small wooden bench in the front hall, and she pressed her old hands against her mouth, and she wept, not loudly, but with her whole body. Ophira did not go to her, not yet. She stood at the wall. She watched her aunt weep, and she thought about the 22 winters she had slept on cots in shelters, and the 22 summers she had eaten day-old bread out of church bins, and the 22 Christmases she had spent alone, and she thought why. Eudora lowered her hands. She looked up. Her face was ruined. "Ophira," she said, "if I had come, if I had claimed you, they would have known you were still Rosalind's daughter. They would have known where to find you. Your father asked me, he begged me not to come for you, because they were watching me, my house, my mail. They were watching for years. He told me the only way you would live to grow up was if there was no adult who loved you attached to your name. He said if you looked on paper like an unwanted child, then they would have no reason to care. He asked me to let me grow up in the system. Yes, and you did. Yes, you did that. Yes, sweetheart, I did that." Ophira looked at her. She thought about the woman she had an hour ago been ready to walk out on, about the woman she had lain awake all night preparing to shout at. She thought about a librarian in a small mountain town, watching a niece she loved be sent to a foster home she could not reach, and believing and having been told that this was the only way that niece would live to be 22. She thought about 11 months of walking up a mountain to water a dead man's apple tree. She thought he asked her to break her own heart so that mine would keep beating. She thought, and she did it. She crossed the hall. She sat down on the bench beside her aunt. She did not say anything. She just took Eudora Fairfax's small, cold hand, and she held it, and she rested her forehead against her aunt's shoulder. And for the first time in 22 years of a life that had told her over and over that she belonged to no one, she let herself belong to someone. They sat like that for a very long time. Outside, the sun came up over the ridge. The light through the tall windows moved slowly across the great room floor. The pocket watch on the study desk 2 flights above them ticked and ticked and ticked and kept ticking, steady and quiet, as if a mechanism that had been waiting for a very long time had finally at last decided that it was safe to start. Then Ophira lifted her head. She wiped her face on the sleeve of her sweater. She said, "Aunt Eudora." Eudora made a small sound, a sound Ophira did not at first recognize, and then she understood. It was the sound of a woman hearing herself called aunt. for the very first time in her life. Yes, sweet girl, we have work to do. We do. Barnaby Thackeray needs to see the journal. Yes, Reverend Kilbride needs to know. She already knows. She has always known. Not everything, but enough. Percival Aldridge, Eudora's hand tightened on hers. Yes, High is still working for them. He is. He has been in this house. I know he has. I have seen the boot prints in the snow around the conservatory for months. Aunt Eudora. Yes, he does not know I have found the archive. No, and he does not know that I know. No. Ophira looked at her aunt. Something moved through her that she had never felt in her life. It was not fear. It was not grief. It was something colder and cleaner and older than both. It was the thing her father had felt. In August of 2003, when he had opened his journal and written, "God, forgive me for what I am about to do," she understood him now. She understood him completely. Then she said quietly, "We do not tell him. No, we finish what he started. Yes, sweetheart. And we finish it before Percival Aldridge realizes we know what we know." Eudora Fairfax lifted her old hand. She placed it against Ophira's cheek. She looked at her sister's face, her sister's eyes, her sister's stubborn, steady jaw. "You look so much like her," she said. "Do I?" "You do." "Good." She stood up. She squared her shoulders. And outside, at the edge of the pine trees, where the mountain fell away toward town, a pair of pale eyes watched the front porch of the Hawthorne Sanctuary, and a man in a wool cap and a heavy oatmeal coat lowered a pair of field binoculars, and he turned very slowly and walked back into the trees, and in his gloved hand he was holding a small black cell phone, which he raised to his ear as he disappeared. They had 3 days. Ophira did not know they had 3 days, not at the start. She did not know until much later, when the whole thing was over and she was sitting on the front porch of the sanctuary with a cup of coffee in her hands, and Barnaby Thackeray told her that Percival Aldridge had booked a return flight to Denver for the following Monday morning. Monday, which was 3 days out, which meant Percival was preparing to leave, which meant Percival was preparing to make it look like an accident, because that was how they had done it 22 years ago, and that was how they were going to do it again. But Ophira did not know any of that yet. What she knew on that first morning, sitting in the front hall with her aunt's hand in hers, was that she had to move quickly, and she had to move quietly, and she had to trust exactly 3 people. She wrote their names on a piece of paper: Aunt Eudora, Barnaby Thackeray, Reverend Odalis Kilbride. She looked at the list. She said, "This is my whole world." Eudora smiled a small, tight, unbearably tender smile. "Sweet girl," she said, "it has always been." The first call went to Barnaby. Eudora made it from the payphone outside the iron skillet, because Ophira did not have a cell phone, because the house did not have a landline, because if Percival was listening, Percival was listening for a young voice, not an old one. Eudora dialed. Eudora waited. Eudora spoke 6 words. She went down. She read it. She hung up. Barnaby Thackeray, 14 floors above Denver, at his desk, set the receiver back in its cradle with a hand that was for the first time in 11 months not steady. He looked at the ceiling. He said out loud to nobody, "Ambrose, old friend, she is ready." He picked up the phone again. He called a number he had not called in 19 years, the office of the Attorney General of the state of Colorado. While they waited, Ophira went down into town. She had to, because a scared little girl would go down into town, because a scared little girl would need groceries, because a scared little girl would want to be seen doing scared little girl things. She walked past the iron skillet with her chin tucked into her coat. She went into the small grocery on the corner. She bought bread, butter, a dozen eggs, a can of tomato soup. She paid in cash. She was at the door when she saw him, across the street, standing outside the inn, Percival Aldridge, watching her through the window of the pharmacy. Their eyes met. He tipped his cap. He smiled. She made her face do the thing it needed to do. She made her mouth curl up. She made her eyes go small and grateful. She lifted a hand and waved, small, shy, the kind of wave a girl gives when she is afraid of a man she is trying not to be afraid of. Percival Aldridge smiled wider. He tipped his cap again. He turned. He walked back into the inn. Ophira stood on the sidewalk with her paper bag of groceries. She counted to 20. She kept the shy smile on her face until she had turned the corner, and then she dropped it, and her hand was shaking, and she thought, that man just watched me pretend not to know he wants to kill me, and she thought, I am getting good at this. She did not know if that was a thing to be proud of. She kept walking. They came up the mountain the following morning, 2 of them, Barnaby Thackeray in his charcoal overcoat, and a woman he introduced as federal prosecutor, Maricela Fontaine, late 50s, dark hair, steel-rimmed glasses. She had the kind of look that had seen 1,000 men lie under oath and remembered every single one. Ophira met them at the gate. She did not shake hands. She said, come inside, fast, don't look at the road. They did not ask why. They followed her. She led them through the conservatory. She unlocked the small iron door behind the apple tree. She led them down the stone stairs. She flipped the switch at the bottom. The archive lit up. Maricela Fontaine did not speak. For a long minute, she walked the length of the room. She ran a gloved finger along the filing cabinets. She stopped in front of the shelves of photographs. She opened one box. She lifted the top folder. She read one page. She closed the folder. She turned to Ophira. Miss Whitaker? Yes. How long have you known this was down here? 26 hours. How many people know? 4, including you. Where are the other 2? My aunt is upstairs. Reverend Kilbride is in her church, waiting. Percival Aldridge. He does not know I have been down here. Are you certain? I am certain. The prosecutor looked at Barnaby. Barnaby nodded once. Maricela Fontaine said very quietly, Miss Whitaker, we are going to need to move this material to a federal facility. Tonight. How? Discreetly. How? She smiled. It was a small, hard, professional smile. Miss Whitaker, my office has been waiting for this evidence for 22 years. We have been ready to move it for 22 years. Ophira sat down on the bottom step of the archive stairs. She put her hands over her face, because it was one thing to read her father's journal, and another thing to hear a federal prosecutor say, out loud, that his life had not been wasted, that the papers on his shelves were not a monument to a private grief. They were an indictment, and the indictment was at last going to be filed. She lowered her hands. She said, what do you need me to do? Maricela Fontaine walked over to her. She knelt. She was old enough to be Ophira's mother. She looked her in the eye. For the next 72 hours, Miss Whitaker, you are going to do exactly what I tell you. Yes, ma'am. You are going to keep smiling at Percival Aldridge. Yes, ma'am. You are going to keep letting him think you are a scared little girl who does not know what she has inherited. Yes, ma'am. You are going to wait for my signal. Yes, ma'am. And when the signal comes, you are going to do the one thing your father built this house to do, which is— The prosecutor stood up. She looked around the archive. She looked back at Ophira. She said very softly, "Ring the bell." The bell. Ophira had not until that moment known there was a bell. But there was a bell. Because 43 years ago, when Ambrose Whitaker had first started restoring the abandoned Hawthorne Sanctuary, he had ordered a bronze bell from a foundry in Massachusetts and had it shipped by rail to Colorado, and he had installed that bell in the copper cupola at the very top of the octagonal turret, and he had rigged it with a system of pulleys and iron rods that ran the whole height of the house to a single lever in the front hall. Barnaby showed her. I walked her out of the archive. He walked her back up through the conservatory, through the great room, into the front hall. He stopped beside the coat rack. He lifted a small wooden panel she had never noticed beside the front door, and underneath the panel was a lever, iron, black, a little smaller than her forearm. Barnaby did not touch it. He said, "This lever, Miss Whitaker, what does it do?" "It rings a bell." "Where?" He pointed at the ceiling. "Up there, in the cupola. On a still winter night with no wind, you can hear that bell from every house in the valley. He built that. He built that." "Why?" "Because—" Barnaby took a long breath. "Because he told me once, 20 years ago, that he had given more to this valley than the valley knew, and that if the day ever came when his daughter needed the valley to give back, he wanted a way to ask." She looked at the lever, small, iron, unassuming. She said, "How many people in this valley does my father matter to?" Barnaby smiled. For the first time since she had met him, the smile reached unmistakably the whole way up to his eyes. "Sweetheart," he said, "I do not think you understand yet what you have inherited." That night Ophira sat by the fire with her aunt and drank a mug of hot cider. She did not go up to the study. She did not go down to the archive. She sat in the rocking chair, and she rocked, and Eudora sat in the chair across from her, and Eudora knitted a small blue thing. Ophira did not know what it was. Something soft, something for her she suspected, something with sleeves. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Eudora said, without looking up, "Sweetheart." "Yes." "May I tell you something about your mother?" "Yes." Eudora's needles clicked slowly. "When Rosalind was 6 years old, she fell out of an oak tree in our backyard, and she broke her arm in 2 places, and I was 14, and I was supposed to be watching her, and I did what any 14-year-old would do. I panicked. I ran into the house, screaming for our mother, and Rosalind on the ground under that oak tree with a broken arm sat up, and she yelled after me. And do you know what she yelled?" "What?" "She yelled, 'Eudora, I am fine. Come back. It only hurts if I think about it.'" Ophira laughed. "Just once. It came out of her before she could stop it." Eudora looked up at her over the top of her knitting. Her eyes were bright. "That was your mother," she said. "That was her whole life. Aunt Eudora." "Yes. I want you to keep telling me things about her." "For how long, sweetheart?" "For the rest of your life." The old woman did not answer. She could not. She just kept knitting. And Ophira rocked, and outside the wind rose in the pines, and somewhere down the mountain, in a room at the Elderwyn Inn, Percival Aldrich sat on the edge of his single bed with a black cell phone pressed to his ear. and he said very quietly to a man in an office in Denver, "Monday morning. It will be Monday morning." She has no idea. She is a scared little girl. She has not been near the study. It will look like a gas leak or a fall. I have not decided. He did not know that Maricela Fontaine had 3 hours earlier secured a wiretap on his phone. He did not know that she was listening. He did not know that when he said Monday morning, a federal prosecutor in a warm office in Denver wrote the words on a legal pad and underlined them. Twice. The signal came on Saturday at dusk. It came in the form of a small, unmarked white van that turned off the main highway, climbed the mountain road, and parked at the iron gate of the Hawthorne Sanctuary. Ophira was ready. She had been ready all day. She had spent the day in the kitchen, baking bread from her mother's recipe book, because there was nothing else to do with the waiting, and because if she was going to do the thing she was about to do, she wanted the smell of her mother's bread in her house when she did it. The van door opened. Maricela Fontaine stepped out. Behind her, 6 agents in blue windbreakers. Maricela walked up the drive. Ophira met her on the porch. Maricela handed her a piece of paper. Ophira looked at it. It was a warrant. She said, "Now." Maricela said, "Now." Ophira turned. She walked into the front hall. She lifted the small wooden panel beside the coat rack. She placed her hand on the iron lever. She looked at Eudora. Eudora nodded. Ophira pulled. The lever went down with a soft mechanical thunk, and nothing happened for half a second. She thought, it doesn't work anymore. It's been 40 years. It's rusted. It doesn't. Then, from 4 floors above her, from the copper cupola at the top of the octagonal turret, at the top of the highest house on the ridge above Elderwin Hollow, Colorado, a sound, a single, bronze, deep bong. It rolled down the mountain. It rolled through the pines. It rolled across the frozen creek and over the roofs of the little houses in the valley below. Bong, then another, bong, then another. The bell was ringing, slow, steady, the way a bell rings for a wedding or a funeral or a fire, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang, and down in Elderwin Hollow in 342 houses on a winter evening in December, porch lights began to come on. Ophira stepped out onto her own porch. She looked down at the valley, and she saw them. 1 light, 2 lights, 10 lights, 30, 60, 100, every window, every porch, every doorway, every barn lamp, every strand of Christmas lights on every eve, coming on, one by one, then in clusters, then all at once. She stopped counting at 200. The valley below her was a lake of gold, and through the pines up the mountain road, headlights, trucks, sedans, pickups, farm trucks, 1 old station wagon with wood paneling, a snowmobile, 2 men on horseback, 1 carrying a rifle across his lap, Reverend O'Dalley's Kilbride in her Ford Bronco with 3 men from her congregation in the back seat, Tess from the Iron Skillet in her father's tow truck, the postmaster, the volunteer fire chief, the old woman with the knitting who had gotten off the bus at Cottonwood. They came up the mountain. They came up her mountain, and they stopped at the gate, and they got out of their trucks, and they stood together in the snow, facing the road down, facing the direction from which someone would have to come, if someone were coming, to hurt her. Ophira could not for a long moment breathe, because she had lived for 22 years in a country where nobody had come for her, where no adult had shown up, where she had waited and waited and waited, and the door had never opened, and now the door was open. And the whole valley was standing at her gate because her father had rung a bell, and they had come because he had one at a time over 4 decades earned the right to ask. Eudora came out onto the porch behind her. The old woman took her hand. She said nothing. They stood together and they watched the lights. And behind them in the great room, Maricela Fontaine's radio crackled. Van 3 at the inn. He's making a break for it. Old Mill Road southbound. Highway Patrol has the roadblock in place at the switchbacks. Estimated intercept 7 minutes. Ophira closed her eyes. 7 minutes. She thought about her mother. She thought about the 2 people who had 22 years ago in a small hospital room in a small city in Colorado told a young father his wife had died of an unforeseen complication. She thought about a man who had 22 years ago driven a doctor truck off a mountain road and walked away in the dark. She thought about the pocket watch in her coat, which was at this moment ticking very softly against her ribs. She opened her eyes. She said out loud to the valley, "Come home now, Dad." She did not at that moment know what she meant. She did not know that Percival Aldridge, 6 miles down the road, was being pulled out of a rental sedan at gunpoint by a Colorado state trooper. She did not know that the Highway Patrol had 20 seconds earlier found a 9mm pistol in his glove compartment and a plane ticket to the Cayman Islands in his coat. She only knew that she had said it and that the wind in the pines had for one long moment gone quiet. They arrested Percival Aldridge at 11 minutes past 7 in the evening. They arrested 3 county commissioners on Monday morning. They arrested a vice president of Ainsworth Mining Corporation on Tuesday afternoon. They arrested a state senator on Thursday. The story broke in the Denver Post on Sunday of the following week, a quiet Sunday, a slow news week, and within 48 hours, the story was on the wire, and within 72, it was on every network, and within a month, an environmental documentary crew was setting up cameras in the little Elderwin Hollow post office, and Maricela Fontaine was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and a criminal case that spanned 2 decades and reached from a Colorado mining company all the way up to a Senate committee was at last being tried. Ophira did not watch it on the news. She did not need to. She had lived it. What she did instead was stay in Elderwin Hollow. She did not go back to Denver. She had thought she might. She had thought that first week that maybe she should, that maybe she was not the kind of person who was allowed to stay in a house like the Hawthorne Sanctuary, that maybe someone with a real name and a real family would show up and tell her she had misunderstood the will, but nobody came. The sanctuary was hers, and Eudora was hers, and Barnaby Thackeray was hers, and Reverend Kilbride was hers, and the valley in some slow, unspoken, steadily deepening way was hers. So she stayed. She stayed all through the trial. She stayed all through Christmas. She stayed all through the winter and into the spring, when the snow melted off the north pastures and the first crocuses came up around the frozen granite fountain at the foot of her drive. And in early April, when the last of the snow had gone, and the apple tree in her conservatory had for the first time in a decade put out one small, stubborn, brave-looking bud, she was standing in the front hall one morning drinking a cup of coffee when Reverend Odalis Kilbride knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. Ophira opened it. The Reverend was smiling. She was holding an envelope. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed with dark red wax. Ophira looked at it. She looked at the Reverend. "What is this?" "He asked me to give it to you when it was time." "When was it going to be time?" "When we were sure." "Sure of what?" "Sure that they could not hurt you any more." Ophira took the envelope. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by that. She said, "Come in." Reverend Kilbride came in. Eudora came out of the kitchen with her coffee. She stopped when she saw the envelope. She did not speak. She just came and stood beside her niece. Ophira sat down at the long dining room table. She turned the envelope over. Her name was on the front, in her father's writing. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The letter was dated 11 months earlier. She read, "My darling girl, if Odalis has given you this letter, then it is over. Then the men who took your mother have been named. Then Percival has been named. Then you are at last safe. I did not know when I began the letters that I would live long enough to write you this one. I began the letters when you were 3. I thought then that they were a way of keeping you close, a private ritual for a private grief. I did not know they would become a habit, and I did not know the habit would become the thing that kept me alive. I want to tell you before I go one thing, because I am going. The doctor gave me 3 months a season ago. I am past 3 months now. I do not have much time, perhaps a week, perhaps 2. I am writing this on the front porch with a mug of tea, and the sun is setting on the ridge, and Eudora will come tomorrow to bring me soup. And I have never in my whole strange life been so grateful for the shape of a day. I want to tell you the truth about where I have been. I have been here. I have been here the whole time. I did not die on the old mill road 20 years ago. I only walked away from a wrecked truck in the dark, and I hiked that same night up this mountain to the house I had been quietly restoring for 6 years, and I moved into a small cabin behind the conservatory, and I have lived in that cabin ever since. Every morning for 20 years, I have watched the sun rise over the ridge, and every night for 20 years, I have watched the road come up from town. You already know where I have been. Odalis has told you. Tess has told you. There is nothing to add except that I was grateful every day to be a small ghost in a valley that let me love it. I have one favor to ask you, my darling. This house is too big for one girl. This house has 41 rooms, and 40 of them right now are empty. I do not want them to stay empty. There are women in this country who sleep in shelters on winter nights. There are girls who age out of the system the way you did with no one waiting for them. There are single mothers driving from town to town looking for work with a baby in a car seat and no roof to sleep under. Please, if you can, bring them here. Bring them here. The sanctuary was never mine. I only kept it warm until it belonged to someone who could give it away. I love you. I have loved you every single day of your life. I have not been perfect. I have been afraid and slow and secret and stubborn, but I have loved you, and that my girl is the one thing your mother and I agreed on from the first minute we knew you were coming. Ambrose. P.S. When you are ready, Odalis will show you where I am buried. It is under the apple tree. Ophira lowered the letter. She did not cry, not right away. She looked up. She looked at Eudora. She said, "Where?" Eudora took her hand. "Come with me, sweetheart." They walked out through the conservatory. Ophira and Eudora and Reverend Odalis Kilbride behind them. The apple tree was blooming, just one branch, just a few flowers, small, white, faintly pink at the edges. Behind the pot in the far corner of the conservatory was a small door in the back wall that Ophira had never noticed before. Eudora opened it. It led out onto a small stone patio, and past the patio, 20 yards up, a mossy path in a small clearing surrounded by pines, a little wooden cabin, weathered gray, one window, one chimney, a rocking chair on the front porch, and beside the cabin, under a young apple tree, a simple headstone. Ophira walked to it. She knelt. She read the words carved into the stone. Ambrose Whitaker, beloved father, who loved his daughter, by being invisible so that she could be seen. She placed her hands flat on the grass. She lowered her forehead until it touched the stone. She whispered, "Dad." She had never in her life said the word out loud to another person. She said it now. "Dad, I'm here." The wind moved in the pines. The apple tree above her let one white blossom drop. It landed on the shoulder of her sweater. She did not brush it off. She stayed there. She stayed there a long, long time. And behind her on the little stone patio, an old woman and a country pastor stood in the sunlight of a Colorado morning. And they did not speak, and they did not move, and they did not either of them wipe the tears off their own faces, because they knew that this was not an ending, that this was the moment a girl named a father for the first time, that this was the moment a whole life turned over from loss into belonging. The Rosalind house opened in June. Ophira did not throw a party. She hung a wooden sign at the iron gate, hand-painted, in Reverend Kilbride's careful curly hand. The Rosalind house, a home for women who need one. Beneath it a smaller line in her aunt's hand. No paperwork, no questions, no cost. Come in. The first woman to arrive came on a Tuesday morning in early June. She was 39 years old. She had 2 children with her, a boy of 6 and a girl of 4. She had been sleeping in her car for 2 months. Ophira met her at the porch. The woman was small. Her mouth was drawn. Her eyes had the look Ophira remembered from her own worst mornings, the look of a person who had already been turned away 4 times that day, and who was out of hope walking one last hopeful mile. Ophira said, "Come in." The woman said, "How much?" Ophira said, "Nothing." The woman said, "How long?" Ophira said, "As long as you need." The woman looked at her. Her lips moved. She could not speak. Ophira reached out. She took the woman's hand. She said, "There's a bed made up on the 2nd floor. It faces east. You will love the morning light. There is bread in the kitchen. My aunt baked it. And there is a rocking horse in the nursery. If you want to send the little ones up to see it. It has been waiting for a long time, for someone to ride it." The little boy looked up at his mother. The little boy said, "Can I?" His mother nodded. She could not still speak. The children ran up the great staircase, and Ophira Whitaker, 22 years old, standing in the front hall of a house on a mountain in Colorado, watched a mother she did not know sink down onto the wooden bench in her front hall and cry, the way any woman cries when she has been carrying the weight of the world by herself, and is for one impossible, unexpected sunlit second allowed to set it down. By August, the Rosalind house had 11 residents. By October, 17. By December 24, women and 13 children. Eudora ran the kitchen. Reverend O'Daly's Kilbride ran the Sunday afternoon soup. Barnaby Thackeray, who had at the age of 79 decided that retirement in Denver was not for him, moved into a small room off the great library and spent his days handling the immigration paperwork and the custody arrangements. The bell in the cupola stayed silent. Ophira only rang it once more, that first winter, on Christmas Eve, not for danger, for joy. She rang it at 7 in the evening, and the whole valley heard it, and every one of them, in every window, in every house in the hollow, lit a candle, and put it in the window, and the road up to the sanctuary that night was a road of small living lights, and they came, and they filled the great room, and they sang carols with a reverend who could not carry a tune, and an aunt who cried without stopping, and a young woman who had 1 year earlier been sleeping on a cot in a shelter downtown, and the pocket watch on the study desk kept perfect time, and upstairs in the small octagonal turret the brass telescope was at last turned the other way, toward the sky. There is one last thing to tell you. On a morning in early spring, when the crocuses were up again around the fountain, and the apple tree in the conservatory had bloomed for the second time in Ophira's care, a small blonde girl arrived at the Rosalind house with her grandmother. The girl was 6. Her grandmother had walked her up from the town. The girl looked quietly around the great room. She walked over to the bookshelf. She saw on the 3rd shelf a small carved wooden horse. She stared at it. Ophira knelt. She said, "Would you like to hold it?" The little girl nodded. Ophira lifted the horse. She placed it in the little girl's palms. The little girl turned it over. She looked at the underside of the belly. She looked at the faded pencil writing. She looked up at Ophira. She said, "Who was the little girl?" Ophira thought about the question. She thought about a father in a study who had carved a horse he was never allowed to give away. She thought about 22 years of birthdays alone. She thought about a bell in a copper cupola and an apple tree that a lonely librarian had walked up a mountain to water for 11 months, and a mother she had never met whose face lived in a silver locket and whose recipes lived in a leather notebook on her kitchen shelf, and whose Bible she still slept with beside her every night. She looked at the little girl. She said the little girl was me. The little girl said, "You got the horse." I did. He waited. He did. That's a really long time. Ophira did not at first answer. She was surprised to find that she was crying. Softly, steadily, without shame, she said, "Yes, sweetheart." He waited. But you know what? What? He is not the only one who waited. She placed her hand on the child's small head. The child considered this. She placed the wooden horse very carefully back on the shelf. She reached up. She took Ophira's hand. She said, "Can we go outside? There's a tree in the little glass room. My grandma said it has flowers." Ophira wiped her face. She stood up. She said, "Yes, honey, yes, let's go see the tree." And she led the child and the child's grandmother and the 2 other women who had just arrived that morning with everything they owned in a plastic bag, and her aunt in her blue coat and Reverend O'Daly's Kilbride behind them, through the great room, down the hall, into the conservatory, where an apple tree was in bloom, where a father was buried, where a family that had spent 22 years scattered across a continent by fear had at last come